was Wednesday night when it wasn't working in here, but we had it for those on YouTube. I don't know why it's not. Okay. Get back to the lesson here. Okay, so we're in the book of Isaiah, and we're going to kind of go through the next set of chapters that are dealing with oracles or burdens or judgments. It really started back in 13 through 23. We already looked at some that's starting out, looking at the judgments that were going to come upon Jerusalem, Israel, Babylon. And so now, 17 through 23, we're not going to cover all of that tonight. The outline that I did produce has all the way through 23, but my goal is to look at 17 and 18. They're kind of short chapters, but first I thought, well, we won't read them, but as I was reading them, there's just some really neat stuff that it's saying in them. And so that I think it's important that we do go ahead and read them. And these are shorter chapters, so it shouldn't be too bad. So let's go ahead and go to 17, verse 1. We're going to read it, and then we'll come back and hit some key points, and then we'll read 18, and then hit some key points, and then kind of summarize. An oracle concerning Damascus. Behold, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins. The cities of Aor are deserted. They will be for flocks, which will lie down, and none will make them afraid. The fortresses will disappear from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus. And the remnant of Syria will be like the glory of the children of Israel, declares the Lord of hosts. And in that day, the glory of Jacob will be brought low, and the fat of his flesh will grow lean. And it shall be as when the reaper gathers standing grain, and his arm harvests the ears, and as one gleans the ears of grain in the valley of Rephaim. Gleanings will be left in it, as with the olive tree is beaten, 2 or 3 berries at the top of the highest bough, 4 or 5 on the branches of the fruit tree, declares the Lord. In that day, man will look to his maker, and his eyes will look on the Holy One of Israel. He will not look to the altars, the works of his hands, and he will not look on what his own fingers have made, either the Asherim or the altars of incense. In that day, their strong cities will be like the desert places of the wooded heights and the hilltops, which they deserted because of the children of Israel, and there will be desolation. For you have forgotten the God of your salvation and have not remembered the rock of your refuge. Therefore, though you plant pleasant plants and sow the vineyard of a stranger, though you make them grow, on that day you plant them and make them blossom in the morning that you sow, yet the harvest will flee away in a day of grief and incurable pain. Ah, the thunder of many peoples as they thunder like thundering of the sea. Ah, the roar of nations, they roar like roaring mighty waters. The nations will roar like the roaring of many waters, but he will rebuke them, and they will flee away, far away, chased like chaff on the mountains before the wind, and the whirling dust before the storm. At evening time, behold terror. Before morning, there are no more. This is the portion of those who loot us, and the lot of those who plunder. So he's focusing in, and he says Damascus, and Ephraim. So to try to bring that into what we probably are more familiar with, this is Syria. When we look at Syria, it is very similar to the borders of modern-day Syria. Damascus, it's still a city. Damascus is considered one of the longest inhabited cities of history that recorded, not in the world from the beginning, but at least historically documented, written down, that Damascus has a long, long history. It is the capital of Syria. Ephraim is referring to the northern kingdom, which is comprised of the 10 northern tribes that split after King Solomon. Now, historically, what's happening, and we've already seen this earlier when Isaiah had brought the prophecy about the destruction of what was going to happen to Israel and the influence of that invasion by Assyria, that it was going to impact Judah and come in on top of them as well. And this is an oracle or a burden giving a little more description towards that event that's fixing to happen. And so one of the problems that they have is that Israel in the north is making alliances with ungodly nations. Judah, at the same time, at this, we're going to see in chapter 18, they're doing the same thing. That is one of the challenges they have, is this idea that they can somehow build these worldly alliances that will help to protect them and guard them, which is just right the opposite of what God has always told his people. Don't make these alliances with these ungodly nations. You need to focus on me, and I will bless you. So this is considered what historians call the Syro-Ephraimite crisis between 734 timeline and also the idea of northern Israel seeking out to put pressure on Judah. And so what they do is Damascus and Ephraim, if we look at the way they're wording it, come into alliance to put pressure on Judah. And they tried to put that on them, and that's when Elisha, earlier in the book, goes to the king and says, don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of it. And so this is a description of what he's already talked about to them. And Assyria is going to crush Damascus. This is what we see in this type of picture that he's drawing up, is that this is an inevitable conclusion that Syria and through Israel is going to be totally crushed in this judgment that's coming upon them. And what's going to happen? What do you see in this is this idea that they have really relied on these foreign gods, foreign alliances, but in that day, it's all going to go away. The cities that were strong and fortified, that they thought were so secure, are going to be wiped out, going to be crushed. Fortresses overnight are just going to be overwhelmed. You're going to see this type of terror that's going to come in. And when you're stripped down, basically saying to them, once everything is gone and all your wooden idols and stuff have failed you, all your alliances have failed you, it's going to have this effect on them, especially the Israelites, to only look one place, and that is to look to God, because they are at the bottom, as you would say. They hit the bottom. He accuses them that they have forgotten their God, the God of their salvation, as he says in verse 10. You have not remembered, he says, the rock of your refuge. And so, no matter what you have done, your fields and all this prosperity that you have is going to be taken away from you completely. And this is something very powerful for us when we look at our relationships and how we feel secure. What makes you feel secure? How do you feel comfortable? What makes you in your life feel uncomfortable and vulnerable? And where do you turn? Now, there's nothing wrong with having friends and having people who can help you. But a lot of times we become really focused on looking and establishing things in this world that we believe are going to rescue us. And in the end, they're not. They're not our rock. They're not where we should focus our salvation on. And so that's kind of the lesson as he's bringing this, is that, and you notice how many times he says, in that day, in that day, in that day. Very specific day. There are some who try to take this prophecy, and as recent as this last year, and believe that this is a judgment on the current city of Damascus, and that the wars that are going on in the Middle East right now is going to be fulfilled when Damascus is destroyed, and that it's a part of that prophecy. And if you have been following that conflict over there, the Israelis have hit Damascus quite hard. A lot of people with pagers and phones were in Damascus when the Israeli Mossad triggered and had that devastation. The Israelis have had a lot of assassination of other, from Iran. And so there's just a lot of conflict around it, a lot of excitement about, and what word comes up? Damascus. So they always say, well, there it is. Isaiah talked about this. That is an extremely, I think, reach. It just, I understand that, prophecies can have what they call historical principles. In other words, there are certain things that God judged 1,000 years ago that could have the exact same conditions and maybe even have the result of a judgment, but that doesn't mean that that's what he's talking about on every time it comes up history-wise. I always say, keep it in the context of what he's talking about. What is going on historical right now? Now, we've already, I think, fairly clearly been able to establish that there's a whole lot of the Messiah that is layered into this. And we're going to see it especially in chapter 18, because it's really going to give more of that. And so, yes, but that to me is different. That's different than trying to take a specific condition in a historical moment like right now and go back and grab prophecies and then say, oh, this is what's happening. This is it. This is it. And I don't know if you have heard about the 23 trumpets, the 24 trumpets that Israel was going to blow, and that was going to usher in that Christ was coming, and they go and grab prophecies from the Old Testament. We're still here, so Jesus didn't come, so I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to belittle it, but I do want you to be aware of the fact that so often we take chapters like 17 here and read this and reapply it. And Revelations is a book that has done a lot in. But this one, it really jumped out at me because I've heard this over and over again as well. And so it's just, again, if you don't know, leave it alone. Keep it in the historical context. We know very clearly that Israel and Syria, Damascus, were joined together in this union to bring upon Judah pressure. And then Assyria comes in and destroys Damascus. We know that because we can match this prophecy with the historical event when it occurred. Enough said? It's like, there it is. I mean, so I just find it. But it is kind of cool and exciting. If I make this stuff up, it makes for good talk. And what did Paul say about that? Itching ears that like to hear that stuff. That's what it kind of reminds me of, is that we're trying to overdo that. There's this imagery he uses of the harvester, and he's really showing the devastation that when a harvester goes through and he starts harvesting with one hand and he's bringing up the crops, what has he got in the other? He's got the sickle, and he's coming through. And there'll be some left. There'll be very little that's going to be left over. He describes it. And then the idea, the thunders in verse 12, the thunder of many people like thunder. They are thundering of the sea, and the roar of nations, a roar like the roaring of mighty waters. The nations roar like roaring of mighty waters. He repeats that. That is a tremendous Hebrewic way of just showing the tremendous force of message of him saying that this is going to be a terrifying invasion by the Assyrians. This is going to be horrific. It's going to cause their young men to shake. It's going to cause all sorts of things. And then by the time it's done, then that's when he comes back and says, but you know what? You're going to start remembering who your real God is. And again, kind of the personal side is it's sad that a person sometimes has to hit rock bottom spiritually before they finally realize how wonderful they have had it with the blessings of God itself. So chapter 18 is an oracle concerning Cush. Anybody know where that's at? You remember that one? Yeah, that's that is Ethiopia, Nebula. That is southern, during about the 25th dynasty. So it's kind of an area just south of Egypt, but very powerful. We know it has a lot of connections. You remember there was a person very important in the book of Acts from where? Ethiopia. So it's interesting because sometimes we don't realize all the involvement of all these different nations and what role did they play in it. And so this is another kind of subtle message about the sovereignty of God, that God is not asleep. God is working. And he may be working with the Ethiopians. You don't know what he's doing, but he is definitely. And that's what I think all these chapters of these oracles really helps to bring out, is how much God is knowledgeable and aware of their transgressions, and how God is going to carry out his justice, and that even through that justice that he's bringing, he's going to fulfill his promise. And there's always that message of hope in there. So let's read 18:1. Ah, land of whirling wings, that is beyond the rivers of Cush, which sends ambassadors by the sea in vessels of papyrus on the waters. Go, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared near and far, a nation mighty, conquering, whose land the rivers divide. All you inhabitants of the world who dwell on the earth, when the signal is raised on the mountains, look, when the trumpet is blown, hear. For thus said the Lord to me, I will quietly look from my dwelling, and dwelling like clear heat in sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of the harvest. Before the harvest, when the blossom is over and the flower becomes a ripening grape, he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks, and the spreading branches he lops off and clears away. They shall all of them be left to the birds of prey on the mountains, to the beasts of the earth. The birds of prey will summer on them, and all the beasts of the earth will winter on them. At that time, a tribute will be brought to the Lord of hosts, from a people tall and smooth, from a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquered, whose land the rivers divide, to Mount Zion, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts. Some of this, again, if you try to break it all down and look, it's, again, you can overcomplicate it, I think. And so, like I said, Ethiopia, would you think? And so one of these is that it's God's timing, and God is the one who is putting things into motion to bring about his justice. Many times, as you read the prophets, you can see where God is giving the messages in not necessarily giving a specific timeline. And then there are times where he's saying it's very short. At the end of 16, he says that within 3 years, that first invasion is going to occur. So he does give some windows, but as he looks at this, the historical timeline, it's important because we do see that there were ambassadors that had come up from Cush. And it seems that they're going to be present during that time whenever this mighty invasion occurs and starts sweeping down across Syria and into Israel. Now remember, they didn't stop there. The Assyrians didn't stop there. They came on in and intruded into Judah, taking some land, and they actually try to take Jerusalem. And they don't. They fail. And this is exactly what Isaiah is talking about. He said it already once before in describing it in earlier chapters, as that it would be as if the water has come up to your neck. In other words, as they invade, you're going to feel the stress of almost being overwhelmed, but it ain't going to happen. The Lord ain't going to let it happen. And that's what he says there at the end of the chapter, is that when he says that he's basically going to stop that. He is not going to allow them to overtake them. This happened whenever they had surrounded Jerusalem. and through their arrogance, tried to destroy the city. And in one night, the Lord struck down the Assyrian army and destroyed them. So there's also this universal summons he's declaring to them that he wants them to look for when he cries out about this signal being raised. Look, listen, watch, because it's coming. Be ready. He's not going to give you the date and time, but he's giving them that idea. In 18:4, we see that this idea of God waits quietly. I'm going to sit. He says, I'm going to be in my house. I'm going to be up there. And, sometimes it gives you that idea that it's on God's timeline. And he's not rushed by politics. It doesn't matter what's happening in the political world. What's going to happen is the way that God is going to carry it out in his righteousness. In 5 and 6 is this pre-harvest pruning. That's the worst time to go pruning. One of the things that I like roses, and I've always wondered, when do you prune them? When can you safely prune, my roses and not cause damage to them? And I know one year I didn't do it correctly and cut them back a little too soon, and they almost died. So there's something about, you don't go out when the fruit is on the trees and decide you're going to harvest. It shows it's too soon, right? Because you do prune. You need to prune. It needs to happen. But in this one, God is basically saying it's going to come really early, and it's going to take away the produce. It's going to destroy it. So there's a lot of discussion about the whirling wing phase of this invasion. It's not real clear. Maybe it has an idea of the chaos that's going to occur and it's going to happen. But overall, when the world is in this chaos, God is calm. God is going to carry out exactly what he's trying to bring about. So I'm going to stop there so we can keep some continuity between these messages. I'm sure you're disappointed I don't go for another hour, right? No. But again, I just think there's some beautiful words, even if you listen to it. I think it's important for us to listen and kind of just read them and get a feel for the wording, the way this is God talking, okay? I think a lot of times we forget, we just think, well, that's Isaiah. Okay, yeah, it is Isaiah, but it reveals a lot about God in the message that he's delivering. You can learn a lot about his character. If there's somebody here with us this evening that we can assist in your relationship with God, I hope that you would take this moment while we sing this invitation song. And if you're comfortable, let us know, and let us know while we stand and sing.